Hello, friends. In the heart of a kingdom long erased by the sweep of empire and the rise of maps, there once lived a boy whose blood was more sacred than scripture. Aurelius became known as the Sun King, though his people lived in perpetual twilight. He rode a golden chariot drawn by 6 white horses, each with wings like an albatross. An unmarked wooden box addressed to me in spidery handwriting. Inside was a leather-bound journal filled with cryptic notes and sketches, clearly detailing the search for a lost city. As I leaf through the brittle pages, I realize with mounting horror that I am following in the footsteps of a madman, that I am retracing the journey of a man, obsessed with a king who should never be spoken of. With every passing day, I find myself irresistibly drawn to this mystery, compelled to uncover the truth about the Gilded Cage and the Sun King. Though I fear what I might find, I am powerless to resist, for it seems fate, like a puppeteer, has taken control of my strings and is dancing to a tune I cannot hear. He wore a crown of twisted gold that scratched at his skin. Whenever he touched a subject, they withered like crops scorched by an eclipse. Peasants spoke of a creeping blight that harvested children in the night. Men went blind staring at his golden armor. Women went mad serenading his palaces. Farmers left their fields untended, scholars sealed their books as if to contain the very air he breathed. All roads led to his court, or so the legends say, where gold was the only currency and silence the only law. Even sunrise seemed afraid to pierce the shutters nailed across his windows. Sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear the ghosts of courtiers shuffling just outside the veil of his audience chamber, waiting for a king who has been dead for centuries, and whose death would echo like a warning etched into the bones of history. War, famine, plague, revolution, climate change, natural disaster, tyranny, invasion. I've been researching the fall of civilizations for decades. My most recent work is a study of the collapse of empires. When I first read accounts of a legendary Sun King, I assumed they were referring to a literal monarch who ruled over a province of Anatolia some 3,000 years ago. But our team discovered that the Sun King's influence stretched far beyond his borders. People from as far away as Greece and India came to visit him. Our team uncovered ruins that matched descriptions of his palaces, except they were in ruins. We also found mass graves outside his borders. Thousands of bodies lying side by side, all facing up as if in prayer. Most unsettling were the countless statues erected in his likeness, all bearing the same inscription: "Do not speak his name." This taboo extended beyond the grave. His enemies defaced his tomb, which may explain why nothing remains of it today. No king in history has been so thoroughly erased. That is until now. Yet none can explain the slow, steady decay of a civilization that surrendered to silence, that chose stillness over speech, stagnation over progress, obedience over thought. How does one explain a society willingly shrouded in endless twilight? What god, demon or king demands such devotion? Who would follow a gilded cage into eternal night? And why would millions of people willingly abandon hope? His name, according to the few surviving fragments of parchment and whispered folklore, was Aurelius IV, though he was never truly called that. To the peasants, he was simply the Gilded One. To his court, he was a fragile idol molded not from flesh and soul, but from gold, prophecy and silence, born during the midnight hour of a solar eclipse. Aurelius was declared a divine child before he could speak. The priests claimed his breath shimmered like incense smoke, that the light bent around his cradle unnaturally. Some said his heartbeat chimed like coins in a brass bowl. His mother died minutes after childbirth, her last words reportedly being, "He shines too brightly." The midwife took her own life a week later. The throne was never meant for him, not at first. His father, King Hadros II, was a towering figure of iron and wrath, obsessed with war and the pursuit of eternal rule. But after the death of his 2 older sons, one drowned mysteriously in a basin of molten silver. The other found frozen in his sleep despite a roaring fire. The path cleared for the youngest. By the age of 6, Aurelius was dressed in gold-threaded robes so heavy he could barely walk. Every meal was presented on sunlit platters. His toys were sculptures. His tutors feared speaking too loudly in his presence. There are no surviving portraits of him. Only a tapestry, preserved in ash beneath a collapsed chapel, shows a small, solemn boy seated on a throne, eyes closed, arms outstretched, as if crucified by expectation. His father was poisoned at the age of 48. Some say it was the Queen Dowager Aurelius's grandmother, a woman whose eyes were always dry, even in mourning. Others say the boy himself, under instruction from his handlers, signed a decree for his father's wine to be blessed with gold leaf, a method of silent execution reserved for traitors. At 9 years old, Aurelius was crowned beneath a black veil, in a cathedral so dark the torchlight barely reached the altar. From that moment, everything began to wither. His reign was a descent into myth and ruin. Historians have proposed many reasons for the downfall of kingdoms. I am the author of a history book about a forgotten kingdom. A few months ago, I received a package in the mail. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Did you know that one of the richest families in the world gets richer every time someone watches one of my videos? Well, actually, it's probably you who's getting richer. Let's talk about you. Specifically, your living situation. Do you ever wish you could just tear down that ugly wall separating your bedroom from the rest of your apartment? Drops of liquid gold were mixed into his medicine. His food was infused with gold shavings. 5 generations before him, his ancestor, Augustus II, had taken the throne as a babe. And if you want to hear more tales of intrigue and horror from the royal courts of old Europe, then you should definitely check out our series. Thanks for watching. His mother, the Queen, had dipped him in holy water blessed by 7 bishops to preserve his health. But the ritual had gone awry, turning the infant's limbs to solid gold, his veins of purest silver. He'd reigned for 39 years, the Golden King, they called him, until his heart turned to iron and beat its last. Then came the slow undoing, generation by generation, until Aurelius, the last of the line, sat alone in his chamber, watching the last of his kin fade in the mirrors. His skin, once pale and soft, began to harden, flake. He could no longer cry. The mirrors were removed, too many of them cracked when he walked past. He stopped speaking altogether at age 11. The chroniclers went silent. The court musicians fled. Rumors spread that the boy had begun to glow faintly in darkness, that touching him caused visions of deserts, screaming suns, and cities made entirely of bone. Or maybe you want to open up that cramped kitchen a bit, get rid of that old brick wall. No one in the kingdom felt any sorrow, not even his mother, the Queen, who for the last 2 years of his life hadn't looked at him directly. Some say she threw herself on her son's cold, still body and wept. But others, those who'd seen the way her eyes glittered when the boy touched a hot coal and didn't flinch, knew better than to trust the stories the palace walls were whispering. You know what would look great in any room? A nice big tapestry depicting scenes from your favorite fantasy world. See, every time you watch one of my videos, you gain knowledge. Aurelius's reign was a curious thing. Not cruel, not kind, simply distant, as though he ruled from behind a wall of glass. He rarely spoke in public. When he did, his voice was soft and hollow, like a harp string stretched to tight. The court chroniclers stopped recording his words after a while. He speaks, one wrote, but not in a language we dare to understand. He was kept indoors almost constantly. Exposure to sunlight, the royal physicians insisted, might cause his skin to blister or crack. A fabricated illness, or perhaps a truth too grotesque to name. Instead, they filled his chambers with mirrors, so that light might reach him second-hand. He grew up watching himself dozens of selves always, slightly warped, slightly delayed. Visitors to the palace reported that the boy would sometimes sit for hours facing the largest mirror, unmoving, tears running silently down his cheeks, as though mourning a version of himself he could never touch. Knowledge is power. The guards were no longer armored but draped in gilded linen. The advisors spoke in metaphors, as if reality itself had begun to fray. No birds sang within the castle walls. The fountains ran dry, replaced with molten brass. The roses in the Queen's garden bloomed black. And then the alchemists arrived. No longer fringe, mystics muttering in cellars. These men were summoned by royal decree and given quarters near the boy's bedchambers. Their task, To perfect a ritual, the Queen Dowager had long obsessed over transmutation, yes, but not of lead to gold. Of blood to eternity, the theory was as ancient as it was grotesque. Gold, they believed, was the incorruptible element. If the boy could be infused with it, if his organs could be slowly replaced, if his blood could carry traces of the divine metal, he might never die. He would become not a king, but a relic and immortal totem ruling forever from behind eyes turned to burnished stone. And with great power comes great wealth. So keep on learning, and one day soon you too can join the family in their lavish mansion made out of pure gold. But enough about them. And now back to our regularly scheduled program. In those final years, the palace grew stranger. The process began subtly. Yet despite all this, or perhaps because of it, when he died 3 years later, Aurelius wasn't the first of his line to turn to gold. This is the host, Aurelius IV, son of the Sun King, born in the lap of luxury, heir to untold riches. The finest metals, the softest cloths, the most sumptuous foods, the rarest wines. Crops failed, veins filled with gold dust. The alchemists had vanished. A rumor surfaces of a statue kept hidden from public view. A boy seated on a throne, eyes shut, arms outstretched. My name is not important. This is my last episode. If you liked it, please leave a like. If you didn't, well, you can leave a dislike. You can also leave a comment, but please don't ask me where you can find more of my work. There won't be any more. This platform has not been kind to my creative process, and it has taken away my joy for writing. I will not be producing episodes anymore. Goodbye. Not sculpted, not carved, but cast from something that was once alive. And if you press your ear to its chest, they say you'll hear not silence, but the sound of coins falling, endlessly falling into an invisible abyss, leaving only scorched manuscripts and the scent of ash. History remembers him as the Sun King's youngest and favorite son, the crown prince who never quite grew up. Legend remembers him as a mad alchemist who bargained for immortality and got it, trapped forever in the prime of his non-life. But I remember him as a boy who woke in the night to find his father gone, who looked out from his window and saw not a kingdom, but a tomb, who clutched his mother's hand and asked why everyone was made of gold, not knowing that she, too, was the vessel of his doom, who hid in the palace gardens and wept, not for himself, but for the alchemists who chased away his tears with promises of eternal joy, only to abandon him when the inevitable price had to be paid, who wandered the empty throne room and whispered to the shadows, calling for his father, for his mother, for anyone at all. For in the end, it is the silence that consumes us all. The guards, once cloaked in shimmering cloth, had abandoned their posts, some without even removing their ceremonial masks. And in the throne room beneath a collapsed dome of cracked obsidian sat the final vision of our Aurelius IV. He was seated upright, clad in robes fused to his body. His flesh no longer bore any color, only the dull, uncanny gleam of tarnished gold. His eyes were shut. His lips were parted slightly, as if caught in a breath that never came. And around him, etched in molten lines across the floor, was a single word, etetanum. It's not a real word in any language, but a broken attempt at eternity. Livestock were born blind. A foreign army approached from the east. They came for the boy king's head, and they would have gotten it too, because by then Aurelius had not been seen in months. The people grew afraid, not of invasion or famine, but of their boy king who had not been seen in months. They said his silence pressed on the lungs of the land like a curse. Then, on a day no calendar preserved, the gates of the palace were opened. By the time he was 12, he had everything a child could want except for one. When the envoys arrived from the east bearing gifts and greetings from their gracious emperor, Aurelius was deemed too busy to receive them. The courtiers whispered that he had been glimpsed twice in the gardens that spring, a wisp of golden hair escaping from beneath his nightgown, running, always running from unseen things. By the winter of his 12th year, the kingdom was already collapsing. The Queen Dowager was found dead in her chambers. They say his body could not be moved, that tools shattered against him, that the moment anyone entered the chamber, they were overcome by silence so deep it rang in the bones. Some claimed that his spirit had escaped into the very metal that his body had turned to, that he had become a god not by ascension, but by suffocation. The throne room was eventually sealed, bricked over, and the palace was abandoned to rot. The city fell within a year, consumed by drought and madness. But sometimes in the museums of old Europe, a child embalmed in glory, a kingdom buried in gold, a warning forgotten, and perhaps remembered too late. Hello, everyone.